work on a game, as opposed to when you sign them up to a contract to work as an independent contractor. Okay, when you sign them up as an employee, anything they do that's in the course of their employment, that's in the course of what you hired them to do, you own the copyright in it. The employer owns the copyright in it, unless you have an agreement to the contrary. So whether you have an employment agreement with them or not, whether it says anything about intellectual property or not, you own what they do. You own the copyright works they produce in the course of their employment. Outside the course of their employment is another issue, and you might have something in the contract if you're, IBM or someone that says anything you think about when you're asleep, we own. But it's not quite that bad. It's pretty bad. But otherwise, in the absence of any contract, right, the employer owns what the employees do. If they're a contractor, if they're an independent contractor, so think about, are they getting leave entitlements? Do they get sick leave? Do they have all those things that go along with being an employer? If they're an independent contractor, then the contractor owns any copyright works they produce, unless you have an agreement that says that you own them. And that's probably the most misunderstood of all the copyright, because people think, well, I'm paying this guy to do the artwork or to code. I own it. But you don't own it unless you have a piece of paper which says you own it. And that's absolutely critical. You've got to get an agreement in place, because so many of my clients, and I work for big businesses who are producing business software, just assume that they own everything that their contractors do. And by the time they come to a dispute about the ownership of the IP and what they've produced, they don't know whether they haven't seen them in 5 years. Tracking them all down is a nightmare, and then when you do track them down, you have to very nicely ask them if they don't mind signing a bit of paper that says that that you own what they produced 5 years ago. And if it's worth anything, they might decide to hold you for ransom. So ensure you consider everyone who had input into your game and work out, were they an employee, were they a contractor? If they were a contractor, do we have a piece of paper that says we own what they put into the game? Okay, so then you've done that and you've worked out what's in the game. You might have stuff in the game which is produced by a third party, and it's important to go through the process of copyright clearance. Film producers know all about this, because every time a film is produced there's a whole lot of stuff in it which needs copyright clearance on television programs. But now the games are becoming more sophisticated and involving more use of third-party multimedia. You need to do this process for games as well. You need to think about, do we have written permission to use everything in our game which was taken from a third party? So images you got off the internet, musical works that someone else wrote. You found a cool piece of sheet music and you decided to get a friend to record that song. You'll need permission from the Collecting Society for the musical work from AMCOS. If you've taken a sound recording, so you've taken a CD of David Bowie, you stuck that music in your game, then you'll need a separate permission for the sound recording as well as the musical work. You'll need permission for photos, for video. You may need permission if you've taken data, so if you've got the AFL fixture or something like that built into your game, you're going to need permission to use that. And you need to make sure that that whatever agreement you have covering all this stuff addresses the term, so how long you can use it, the territory, where can you use it, is it worldwide or is it just Australia and New Zealand, the royalty, what you have to pay in order to include it, is it per sale rate or something like that, or is it a flat rate? Creative control, do they get any say on how you use the third-party material in the game? Do they have to approve it? Hopefully not. And you need to consider the moral rights of the author also. We have a thing now under the Australian Copyright Act called moral rights, which you may know about if you're an artist, or hopefully you know about. The person who creates something owns the copyright, which is like the economic rights in a work. But they also own a thing called moral rights, which are the sort of touchy-feely, I am an artist rights. And they can go off and sell the copyright, and probably will, or their employer might own it, or they might go off and assign it to someone as part of for money. But the artist always retains moral rights in what they do, and it's things like the right of attribution, so the right to have their name associated with what they've produced, and the right of integrity, the right not to have their work treated in a way which would damage their reputation, so the right not to have your the right not to have your beautiful work of art torn up by some avant-garde artist and put on show, torn into pieces or something. There's those moral rights, and they stay with the author. The author can't sell those, which means that if you're using someone's work, well, you need to attribute it for a start, but if you're doing anything which might infringe the right of integrity, so you're using it in a way that the artist might not be so happy with, then you need to find the artist, even if it's not the person who owns the copyright, and get their consent to doing what you propose to do with their work. It's quite a new concept. It's only been in the Copyright Act for a couple of years, but it's a significant thing, particularly if you're remixing someone's work, or you're cutting it into pieces, or you're putting it completely out of context or something like that. It's worth thinking about. The fourth issue is development agreements. I'll probably spend a little bit more time on this because this is just a very high-level overview of the issues associated with a development agreement. So this applies if you're producing a game under contract for someone, either a publisher, or you might be producing a flash game for an advertising agency, or for a big corporate, or for a mobile phone company or something like that. And I guess it also applies, we talked about outsourcing earlier, I guess it also applies in reverse. If you're outsourcing to someone else, you'll be signing a development agreement for them to do something. So any situation where you're producing work under contract. The first important thing is it clear what we have to deliver and when? That sounds incredibly trite, but it's surprising how often you see contracts where it's not really clear what has to be done and when it has to be done by. You want to make sure that you have a set of specifications, and the specifications are the document which says exactly what you have to produce, so exactly what the game has to be, insofar as it's been defined at the beginning of the project. So if they want you to produce an M-rated game, it's got to be a first-person shooter, it's got to involve a corporate logo or something. If they, any specifications, technical or functional, or what features it's got to have, or what platforms it's got to run on, that's all got to be in the specifications. The specifications are like the Bible, because you'll have somewhere in the contract something which says you've got to fix any problems or any defects or any errors in the software. But how do you know what's a defect, and how do you know what's an undocumented feature? And you could argue about that. I'm sure Microsoft has argued about that for many hours. Well, the way you work out what's a defect and what's an undocumented feature is you look at the specifications, and if the specification says it's got to be one way and it's not, then that's a defect. So it's very important to have a good set of specifications, so you know exactly what you have to deliver and when, and a timetable as well that sets out when you've got to do everything, and says whether the dates are absolutely fixed or whether they're flexible. Is there a process to change the dates if delays happen and that sort of thing? 2 minutes, okay, good. If things go wrong, okay, is it clear what the other party has to do to make sure that we can perform our obligations? So you've got all this stuff that you've got to do, but what does the other party have to do to allow you to do what you have to do? That's very important, because if you don't do what you have to do, the first thing you're going to say is, but you didn't provide us with this document, or you didn't provide us with access to this resource, or something like that. So you need, somewhere in the contract, it has to say, you have to do all this to allow us to do our job. What happens if there are delays? What if the delays are not our fault, most importantly? What if the delays are the customer's fault? What's going to happen? Is there delay compensation, and is it reasonable? There's a lot of, you'll see a lot of contracts which sort of get ambitious and say if you're a day late, you've got to pay $6,000, and that's supposed to be, a big stick to make you comply. But you need to think about, well, what if we are a week late? Can we afford it, or are we is the company going to go bust if we're a day late on this project? Change management procedures. If stuff changes, and we need to remain flexible halfway through a project, but if stuff changes, do we have a procedure which actually manages how we're going to agree to that change, and ensures that we're all on the same page in terms of what the changed specifications and the changed timetable are? When do you get paid? That's really important. Remember, the payment structure will affect your bargaining position the whole way through the contract. Possession is 9/10 of the law. possession of money is probably 9.5 tenths of the law. And